Hello there. Once again, you find yourself looking at the friendly face of my tuning bench. This video is not about tuning as such. This video is demonstrating voicing. Voicing referring to setting up the gap at the end of the reed where it sits just slightly above the reed plate. Firstly, the tools I use, very few. We have a Stanley blade, various screwdrivers of various thickness, and my tuning bench, which makes air out of that hole. And we have, as the demonstration subject, a reed block which appears to be out of an old Scandali, very much a used reed block from my spare parts pile. Now, I'm going to close in on some of these reeds. Reed number 1 is gapped pretty much correctly. The rule of thumb is that the gap where the reed sits above the plate is about equivalent to the thickness of the reed. Reed number 2 has too great a gap. Reed number 3 has too small a gap. And we'll just set these up on the bench and see how they behave. Reed number 1. Starts just fine. We're hearing reeds from the top reed and the underneath reed. At the moment, we're just talking about the top reed. Now, this reed with the too great a gap will be slow to start. And this reed number 3 with too small a gap will start at low pressure. It will not start at high pressure. Oops, it started. There you go. I gave it a lot of air and it wouldn't start. So that's we move on to correcting these things now. Reed number 2. We're going to look at closing up the gap on this reed. I'm leaning on the reed about a third of the way along and pushing to try and close up that gap. That's pretty close, maybe a shade small. However, it will now start readily. Reed 3 with the too small a gap. Now we are using the blade, which we get under it, and we try not to damage the valve. Not that it matters on this old wreck, but lifting like that, and we've now got what looks like a pretty good gap there. So just to look at the gaps, which I've just done on those reeds, and look, for just doing it that quickly, I've got them very good. Now we'll look at a pull reed, which is the ones on the underside of the plate, which play when you're pulling on the bellows. The pull one's fine. The push one, is fine. The pull one, you can hear air flowing, but the reed not sounding in a hurry. So we need to close up that gap, which we do by getting a screwdriver underneath it. It's a bit difficult with the camera in the way. Okay, and now we may wish to get the blade under that and bend it a bit. Still a bit to go on there. Now, when we bend reeds, we are trying to get the bend across the full length of them rather than in the particular spot. And that reed is now responding a whole lot better. I'd do a bit more were it my own instrument, but for the purposes of demonstration, that's pretty good. Now, I'm quite the stickler for getting voicing absolutely right, which means reeds won't choke under any circumstances, but equally they will all start on the slightest whiff of air. And one good technique for getting this right is to listen to the reeds on both sides of a block and see if one reed is starting more quickly than the other. And I think we've got a pull reed on this one which is doing exactly that. So on the push, they start pretty much simultaneously on very little air on the pull reeds. Yeah, you can hear one is playing there, and the second one is a bit slow to follow. So let's see which one it is. Okay, it's the underside one, and we now have a very small tool for closing up the gap. Again, we try and put the bend across the length of the reed, which means generally getting most of the pressure about a third of the way along the reed. Let's just see how that does work. Okay, so they're now starting right at the same time on the same amount of air. Tuning is another matter, but that's not what we're looking at here. Now, this is the moment of this tutorial where it could get a bit controversial. The accordion world is full of people who say you can't do that, and the reason for saying you can't do that is because everyone says you can't do that, but it's usually not because they've run the experiment themselves to prove their point. Now, what we haven't looked at yet in the voicing is looking for too small a gap and choking reeds on the pull or the underside reeds. Now, the best way I've found to establish that, and bear in mind that players can get a lot of strength pulling on reeds, a lot of air pressure on them. They can't get so much pushing the bellows shut because the air pressure will lift pallets, and that's the limitation on how much pressure you can get. But on pulling, players can get a lot of pressure on the reeds, and I don't think anyone's bench is going to be able to make the sort of air pressure we're talking about here. So the best way I've found to ensure that reeds are not choking on the pull is by blowing the reeds by mouth. Now, that is where it gets controversial because people say you will put moisture in, you will rust the reeds. I contend that it does not take much playing to blow away, evaporate off all the moisture you might have put in. Indeed, all my instruments have had this done to them. And when I look at one of my instruments 5 years later to tidy up some aspect or something that needs fixing, I do not see rusty reeds. So I contend that this is safe, but we're going to get lots of comments of people who say, no, you can't do that. That is the world. So I'm going to blow all these reeds and look for any which choke. Now, there is a technique involved in blowing. Blowing, like blowing out a candle, works on the small reeds, but on the larger reeds, you have to do a different sort of blowing. You're sort of bringing up a column of air from your diaphragm up through your mouth. It's more of a singing technique. It's not so much blowing as heaving a massive air up your windpipe. So let's get started on some blowing. So like a candle up this end. Now it's starting to come more from my diaphragm. Well and truly from my diaphragm now, and also bleeding a bit of air off to reduce the pressure, but this is just something you've got to work out and learn how to do. Aha, we found a choker. So this is the reed which was choking on the pull. You'd never know on the bench that anything was wrong. Even if I put a bit of fairly high pressure into it, I can't get the pressure I can get with my mouth. And sure as eggs, you can get someone on stage, pulls the hell out of their accordion to play with a loud band, and then has a note not happen, and they're back to complain that you've done a bad job on their accordion. So we have to now open the gap on that reed. And we will lift the valve out of the way and lean on this reed about a third of the way along. And see how that is sounding. Still choking on the mouth. We'll keep going. And there it is. That's opened the gap. Probably opened it up a little too much because it's a little slow to start, but that's the technique you need to use anyway. Now here's a final word of caution. This reed here. You might get it wrong and get the reed looking like this, or the person before you might have done that. See, it's got a bit of a gap under the middle, but no gap at the end, and that's had a bit of an arch bent into it by the person, maybe yourself, not getting the voicing technique quite right. And even myself, very occasionally, I still might do that sometimes. So that's something to look out for. Always, if a reed's not responding as you think it should, just look at it from this angle and see if that's potentially a problem. You should be seeing a reed that's essentially straight like this one and not like that. Well, that's about all for this little tutorial, so yeah, happy squeezing.